I wanted to kind of go over with you just kind of the program overview for this specific program. But it should be able to apply in just about any type of programs that you're doing. With domestic violence, actually the acronym I have is SPADES, and I just realized the copy I gave you was my uncorrected copy, so I apologize. SPADES basically, S stands for Stop the Physical Violence. And then the second thing that we're looking at is the P is for personal responsibility. So we want them to accept personal responsibility. One of the things that actually some research has been done on groups, and what they have found is in groups where personal responsibility is modeled and expected, that the group discussions, for example, are focused on personal responsibility, not blaming other people, not complaining about how life is. They actually find that those are more engaged clients, and they actually make greater changes in a shorter amount of time. So it's very interesting when you look at some of, a little bit of the research that's getting done. So that means, especially with domestic violence, in groups where they're allowed to sit around and basically complain about their partner and act like poor pitiful me, those are actually the ones who do not stay very long, and they don't tend to make much change. And that was something the men shared with us, that they really did not like going to a group where all they heard was complaining. So accepting personal responsibility, plus that's empowering. If I'm responsible for what the choices I'm making, then I can make different choices. But if everybody else is responsible for my choices, then I have no power at all, because I'm just like a puppet on a string. They'll decide when I'm happy, and they'll decide when I'm miserable. Okay, so personal responsibility actually is very needed by them in order to be able to make positive changes. A is advanced skill building. That's one of the other goals we have in the intervention program, is we want to advance the skills that they have in being able to make those changes. Skills that, and we'll do some skill building a little bit later this afternoon, skill building exercises. What would be some things you guys think about when you think about skill building? What are some skills that they need? Communicating, okay? So communication, definitely a skill, important. Diane?
Coping.
What was that?
Coping.
Skills. Yeah, coping skills. I mean, life happens, doesn't it? We need to be able to learn how to cope with difficult situations. What else? What would be some other skills? Listening, very good. And we actually, if we have time, we'll do a little listening exercise, because there is one in the book for that. Excellent. What other skills might they need?
Reasoning skills.
Reasoning, critical thinking, yes. Being able to think for themselves, being able to reason out how to problem solve. Good. One.
Social skills.
Social skills, very good. Like, what would be some that come to mind?
Being able to interact in a crowded room.
Oh.
Being able to survive.
Uh-huh. Because that can be really intimidating, can it? Especially for the population a lot of times we're dealing with, which have been incarcerated, and so that is very scary for them. They're constantly being hypervigilant. And then you also do a lot of work with job readiness and that kind of
Correct. For the
thing.
population.
So is that part of the skill building you use in that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Kind of help them to communicate and be able to work in be comfortable in a large room, how to with a lot of people.
Yeah, and being comfortable with who they are, and just finding out who they are, being able to speak to just anyone.
Good. That's great. Any other skill building that comes to mind?
Skills, self-esteem, improve your self-esteem. And that's part of the social.
Mm-hmm. Improving their self-esteem. If they feel better about themselves, they can feel better about somebody else. That's one of the things that I've talked with the men about. If you can't give out what you don't possess, would we all agree with that? I mean, I'd like to give $1 million to some charities I think are doing really great work, but I don't have $1 million. So it doesn't matter if I want that or not. I don't have it. I don't possess it, so I can't give it out. Well, with self-esteem, if you don't feel good about yourself, how could you possibly give out good vibes and good things to other people if you don't even possess it within yourself? So it is important to bring up their value of themselves, so now you can hold them accountable for valuing other people. And we do that through the skill building, and then encouraging them, being their cheerleader. When you're running groups, one thing I find myself doing is I'm constantly looking for when are they doing or saying something positive, something that's encouraging, that they've shown that they're learning, whatever. And I'm constantly capitalizing on that because I want to I want to pay attention to the stuff I want them to do. So if they give an answer to a question, I want to, wow, that was really great, that was wonderful. Sometimes they're very nervous, and we need to be cognizant of that so that when they do actually blurt something out, we actually respond to that instead of being silent. Silence is not always golden when it comes to our groups. If we don't say anything to them, they may think, oh, she thinks I was stupid, or he thinks I was dumb. I shouldn't have said anything. When we talk about extroverts and introverts, what's interesting is for an extrovert, although they're all out there and kind of, you don't miss them in the room, the problem is they don't think they've done a good job unless somebody has told them they've done a good job. So it's almost counterintuitive to what we would think, well, you're always talking, you're always out there. Well, it's because they're constantly looking for that appraisal, that people are telling them they're doing a good job. So it's just something to keep in mind, that when we give out that positive feedback, sometimes it carries a lot more weight than we realize as far as the changes. Ryan?
I just wanted to make a comment and kind of ask your opinion on being able to discern if the information, the feedback that we're getting is what perhaps the participant thinks that we want to hear and not what they necessarily believe. And how to, I don't know, kind of ask for more, or continue validating that person, but maybe ask for a little bit deeper, or just really what they mean instead of what they think.
Okay,
we want.
so what strategies have you used in that regard?
I don't know. I appreciate that they've shared, or that they said anything, but maybe to create that environment, or to just reinforce that, to be blunt. You don't need to tell us what you think we want to hear. We've heard so many. There's just nothing you can say that maybe would offend us or make us feel bad, or that you're safe here and being honest.
And that's a good strategy, just from the get-go and on a regular basis. There's nothing you can say that's going to offend us or cause us to not like you. What we told them in the Batterers group was, this is the no shame zone. You can't fix what you're still trying to protect. So, and when people feel shame, they get defensive, and they're trying to protect themselves from getting hurt. So we've made it very clear that that is exactly what we're looking for, is that admission of behaviors, because then now we have something to work with and to fix. What about some other ideas? He brought up a good point. Any other thoughts on how you would handle that person feeling like they have to tell you what you want to hear, rather than, how would you take that deeper? How would you guys?
I think building the relationship with the client is the most important thing, that you just have to build the rapport and let them go at their pace, and not so that they don't feel pressured to talk. So I just think it takes time. Yeah,
and that's, building that relationship does take time, and so it does start off with they want to see if they can give you the answer they think you want to hear. And then eventually, when you have that relationship, you're able to go a little bit deeper with that. Or, or even just asking, do you want to tell me what that would mean to you, or what that would look like for you? Might be another strategy. So, yeah, good. And we have clients that, they want to tell us what they think we want to hear, and, that's part of that early stage. That's moving from that pre-contemplative to the contemplative, probably. They're not quite sure yet. In a sense, they kind of wanted to get you off their backs, so they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, so that way you'll get off of them and go on to somebody else. Do we have that happen sometimes? And we know if we have a long time with them, we know we have time to build that relationship, and that's what we're working on. Okay, so we have the skill building, demonstrate empathy. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. In demonstrating empathy, it's what we do up front. Are we showing that we're empathizing with where the person's coming from, not trying to embarrass or shame them? And also, I will say that not only do we demonstrate it, but in the program, there are lots of opportunities to try to elicit empathy for their partner. So there are questionnaires that they will answer for themselves, And this is a really important point. Somebody doesn't care how they've hurt somebody else until you care how they've been hurt, has been my experience. So if you don't care about my pain, I don't care about anybody else's pain. So in other words, we will have questionnaires. One of them, I forget which week it is, it's toward the end, but it's a questionnaire about abusive behavior. It's looking at healthy and unhealthy behaviors. The first part of the questionnaire is actually, have you ever had somebody, and we list a whole list of abusive behaviors, put you down, not care about what you say, accuse you of something falsely. So we ask all these questions for them being a victim of those abusive behaviors. Then, once we've heard their side of the story, if you will, now we have them flip it over to the other side. Have you ever done these behaviors to your partner? And it gives them a whole list. And what was interesting was to watch their responses, because if you had given them their part first, I guarantee what we would have heard was, well, she's done that to me too, and so it would have been completely defensive. We took away the defenses by simply letting them tell their side of the story first. Now we want to ask you, have you done these things? Which things do you need to work on and improve in your life? So that's one thing to consider, is that when you're working, that's part of that trauma-informed care. When we're working with clients, we need to acknowledge they've been traumatized. They've had negative experiences. Once we listen to that, now we have permission to be able to step to the other side, which is to say, but where have you done these? And what do you still need to work on? Does that make sense? Okay. And that's part of that empathy. Okay, educate on abuse. We want to educate them on what is abusive behavior. Sometimes, we kind of take for granted they know that certain behaviors are abusive, but they're not. They don't necessarily know that. Even in substance abuse, it's important to recognize the abusive nature, what am I trying to say? The abuse that you've perpetrated on your own family members through your addiction. Waiting up at all hours of the night for you to come home. Just about any type of group we're working with, it's important for them to understand how their behavior could be abusive to somebody else. Okay, and then the last of SPADES is stimulate introspection. We want them to start paying attention to looking inside themselves, looking at what they think and how they think about themselves and how they think about their behaviors. Okay, any questions or comments on the intervention goals?
That is really the whole program, isn't it? To have them look at themselves,
Yeah.
to evaluate themselves. Until they get there, it's pretty hard for them to make any changes.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, you can't change
Which is
what
true with
you
all of
don't
us.
know. No, that's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. So all of our feedback, our questions, everything, we want to look at which of those goals, am I meeting those goals during each group session? As many as possible. Am I getting them to think about themselves? Am I demonstrating empathy, and am I getting them to understand, step in somebody else's shoes and think about how their behavior affected somebody else?
Just for best practices, one time I was engaged in a conversation with a class about what they had done to their families, and I said, one of the questions that I asked them was, have you ever stolen from your mother? And almost all of them said no. Okay, so then I delved a little deeper, and I said, well, let's see, did you ever make your mother stay up late waiting for you to see what you were doing? Because that's like stealing sleep from her.
Yeah.
And this one guy in the class just kind of got hit across the head, because his eyes just got big. He says, Mr. Sosa, he says, I'm never going to forget this class. I had never looked at it that way. So he had like an aha moment.
Yes.
He talked about it for weeks.
Told me about it.
Yeah, told me to do another class about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Because
So-
what you've done is you've created something that's real life. You reframed. See, when we say the word stolen, probably for many of them, they thought, well, went and took money out of her wallet or whatever. Didn't think about the other stuff that can be stolen. Somebody's time, somebody's peace of mind.
Yes.
Those can be stolen. Your innocence can be stolen. So
It was very interesting. It took the rest of the class. I mean, the subject then went the whole rest of the class.
That's
and I
great.
let it go because it was good. Everybody seemed to be into it. So
yes.
good.
And that's where, as we, as we look at our techniques and strategies, we want to know where we're going with that class, with that group. If they're getting something out of it that we think is important, it's a valuable lesson, then that's where we want to go with it. The curriculum here is all objective driven. So, for example, just open up to one of the lessons. I've got page 58, but it really doesn't matter, any of the lessons. What you'll notice is there are objectives. So for a more experienced facilitator who doesn't need the step-by-step, script, if you will, although I would recommend you read through the script, just simply so you know kind of where the class is headed, you're able to look at those objectives, and if you know that that's where the class is going, even if it's just off that one topic, then that's perfect. You're moving them along. So just kind of a heads up. It tells you what tools you need. So at least you have that stuff ahead of time. In week 12, for example, you need to have some flashcards that are ready to go for the questions you're going to ask. And then there's handouts, which you're going to be referring them to in the handout book. And then, of course, the objectives. So having the objectives tells you where you're going to go. If it's about perceptions and the cycle of violence, one objective is the participant will be able to recognize different perceptions to the same stimuli. That's what we did earlier, was working on those perceptions. Participant will share their ideas with other classmates and discuss differences. So we're teaching them how to communicate and how to talk about differences, things that they see differently than somebody else. In this particular class, number 3, participant will analyze the stages for the cycle of violence. However you want to teach, you want to make sure that you're getting them to analyze those stages. What does it look like? What does it look like for them? Number 4, participant will consider how their thinking, feeling, and actions relate to the cycle of violence. So you would come up with examples. I have examples here in the actual facilitator guide, but you may come up with something different. The goal is simply that you want them to think about how their thinking, feeling, and actions relate to the cycle of violence. So it doesn't have to be the example in here, it could be your own. So think about any classes you're teaching. If your curriculum doesn't have objectives, think about your own objectives. Where are you going to go with this? What do you want to see at the end of the day? How do you want to get those aha moments? Sometimes they'll come up and surprise you because you hadn't thought about it. But that was such a great example because it is something that most people probably don't think about, is stealing sleep from their mother because of leaving her up at night waiting for them. So that was an excellent example. So that moves us into the interventions for change. One of the, let's see, if you go to page, it's X, it's in the very beginning. It's just the introduction, the program interview. X and XI. This talks about, you don't have to be a clinician to run this particular program, but it helps to have a working knowledge on some of this information of motivational interviewing and the readiness to change. And so I'm going to give you just kind of a cheat sheet for yourselves. This talks about the motivational interviewing. In fact, I have the book up here if you're not familiar with it and you might want to get a copy. I think that's 4 right there. Okay. It talks about, there's 5 principles to this process of motivational interviewing. Like I said, I actually do specific training on this one. There you go. But it talks about responses, it's about reflective listening and about assumptions to avoid. And one of the assumptions is this person ought to change. That's not really our responsibility. We can provide the material, but if we're assuming they ought to change, then we have put ourselves in a position of judgment on them. And that usually is not going to go over real well as far as getting them to change. Signs of resistance, when they're arguing with you, when they're interrupting you, ignoring you. So these are some strategies. If this is something that you think would be helpful to get more training on, let your agency head know, and we can maybe set up another training. I just did this, I think about 6 months ago. It was called Managing Mandated Clients. And it was kind of reducing. I think you guys were in that class, weren't you?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah. Was that helpful for that? Because we did some MI. And we'll do some more. But that's just what I'm talking about when we talk about those strategies for MI. Today we're not going to spend time on that, but I want you to have the sheet just in case. All right, so let's look at the interventions for change. On your handout, there's 4 of them. One is acceptance, and that's just simply for who they are, not what they've done. And we talked about that earlier when we were discussing that identity issue. And the second one, validation, and that's just simply acknowledging and giving support for the change that they're making. Clarification, this is so important, and I've sat in groups where I've seen this happen. Make sure you understand what they said, not just head bob. You ever seen that where somebody says something really off the wall and the facilitator, oh, okay, So it's almost like giving tacit approval. We need to gently and respectfully correct the errors in thinking, which we discussed earlier. There are distortions that in the way they see things, in the way they're seeing the world, they see their relationships. I always love it when it seems invariably in a group, and talk about being a blank slate, because it's invariable. The guy will sit there and he'll say, well, women just do X, Y, Z. I go, really? All women? Like me? What do you think I do? Well, no, not you.
Different.
You're different, exactly. So, it's challenging those stereotypes that come out because, we don't have to get mean or ugly about it, but it's just simply challenging it, asking questions like, and so how is that working for you? And I remember having one guy, in fact, we all shared him. He was quite cantankerous, and he made a very negative, disparaging comment. And I said, so how did that work out for you then? Well, I'm in this class. I go, okay, so we at least know how that ends. So he not only changed, he actually came back and visited a few times. So it was pretty cool. So I'll share with you later on that one. But it is important for us to confront that. Okay, we need to challenge that. Here's the problem. If you don't confront, especially the behavior we're trying to change, if you don't deal with it, what happens is you have given tacit approval to everybody else. Well, the facilitator must think it's not a big deal. If they didn't say anything about it, it must not be a big deal. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it is important that we are listening and we are confronting those issues. It doesn't have to be harsh, but it does need to be addressed. Any thoughts on this one?
That's a big one. I mean, it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're where they're at. Doesn't mean that they're right, wrong, or indifferent. That's where they happen to be at, but we need to get them out of there, or at least bring their attention to it. Mm-hmm. General remarks about women is a good example, because it comes up all the time. Yeah. And in my class, because it's an open class, mm-hmm. It usually comes from the newer people that are coming in. Right. And then it's beautiful when the older ones correct them or bring their attention to it rather than me. Yes. Because they seem to hear it better, or it's coming from their peers. Mm-hmm. But
and you bring up a very good point, and this takes some skill to practice, but sometimes what we want to encourage our participants to do is to be able to correct each other in a gentle way. And actually, on their progress note, that is actually one of the strategies they're to be looking at is I'm able to give constructive feedback to my peers and to the facilitator. And so we not only want to model that, but we also want to watch and make sure we don't let one person abuse somebody else in the group. And so if that ever happens, consider that you're going to need to probably come in and kind of separate it in the sense that you want to address the person who was trying to correct, but maybe reframe what they just said and then try to bolster that other person up, because the problem is then you get animosity going on in the group, and it also lets the other people think that you'll let other people pick on them. Okay, so let's look at the adult learning principles as we're kind of wrapping through this section. What are some things that come to mind when we talk about movement? How would you get your participants to group activities? Okay. What would be some group activities you could use?
I do poster paper presentations. I do the poster paper, and so I'll give them a drug of choice, and rather than going over all the drugs of choice, I break them up into 5 groups. Okay, you're going to do cocaine, you're going to do methamphetamine. Provide them with the research, we watch a video, and so the group has to come up with it, and then by the end of the class, they have to present what knowledge they have or what they've gained.
Terrific.
So do that.
That's good. So breaking up the material into segments where you can give each group a different piece of the material. Great idea. What else would be some other movement?
I work with kids a lot, so we do art activities.
Great.
Goes along with it.
Good. And you know, surprisingly, there are several activities in that curriculum where we have the men do art or coloring. And one of them is color what your anger looks like. So we give them a paper plate, and they can either cut out, you know, if they're like me and they draw stick people, they can cut out cartoon pictures. And but if they're artistic at all, they can draw what their anger looks like, and that actually goes over quite well. It's definitely good for your kinesthetic learners, and it's fun for them to kind of get creative. Ruben?
I'll share this. I mean, it's just something that maybe somebody else wants to use, but what I did one day, and it kind of came to me as I was working through the materials. I drew an outline of a car on the board.
Oh yeah.
And I asked the class to come up and fill in the parts of the car one at a time. And so one guy put the mirror and the other guy put the headlight and then they really got excited. Pretty soon the car's looking real fancy. I mean, really good.
Wow.
They did a real good job. And then I said, it's really great, guys, but I have to erase it. So I erased it. And then I just kind of drew a cloud. And I said, now I want you to draw for me what anger looks like to you, one part at a time.
Oh,
And
okay.
the board filled up with words, you know, like hate, hit, spit, cuss. I mean, you name it. The whole board just got filled up.
Excellent.
And they were getting an idea of everything that anger is about. I mean, it's about a lot of stuff.
A lot of feelings.
Yeah, by the end of class, everybody was tired. I mean, it's like really good exercise. So I use it as a movement. They get a lot of action out of it.
Yes.
Because everybody has to get up and sit down.
Come up and sit down. Okay, good. Very good. Great way. Any other thoughts on movement? I know we talked earlier, even just doing, you know, turning to your table mate and saying something, or doing the flip charts like we did earlier. You know, those are very basic. One modification on the flip chart: if by chance you have you can't get people to move around the room and such, what you might consider is getting like a 11 by 14 paper and just putting the heading on the top, and each table then gets their minute to answer, and then you just switch the papers around the room until everybody's had a chance. So that might be one modification you could use if you don't actually have a room big enough that you can do flip charts on the wall. So good. Let's look feedback. We talked about this earlier. It goes both ways. So we want to give them feedback, but we also want to have them feel comfortable and safe enough to be able to give us some feedback. And then the discovery, the aha moments, as you were mentioning earlier, Ruben. Those are, that's where sometimes with the flip chart, you guys had mentioned this when you were filling out the flip charts. It made you think about stuff you hadn't thought about before. It really made you go a little bit deeper. Okay, and then the safe learning environment. Ask yourself, would you want to spend time in their seats? You know, is it comfortable enough? Is it, you know, I do things like I put these things on the table simply because it's nice to have a little munchy candy sometimes. Those are just things to make it more comfortable and easier to just make it more inviting as far as an environment. But one of the other things we want to look at as well is, are we controlling the pace of the class, and are we protecting them from each other, from any type of abuse? Okay, any thoughts or questions on that? We're pretty much through there. We want to identify the negative, teach to the positive. We're going to do a lethality example next week. We're going to watch a video. I'm going to teach you how to teach to a video clip next week. And one of the things that we do is they get the power and control wheel, and on the back side is the equality wheel. So I have them identify the negative behaviors, the power and control behaviors that we saw in the video. But what I don't ask them to identify for themselves, because quite frankly, when you watch them watch this movie, you know they're getting it. What I do have them do is I turn it over and say, okay, look at the equality wheel. Which ones are you currently doing? Which ones do you still need to work on? Because again, I'm identifying the negative. We've just watched a whole lot of negative, but I want to promote the positive. That's what I want to teach to. So that's what we want, is that replacement behavior. So think about, with your behaviors, with the things you're teaching, identify the negative, but how do you teach to the positive? You're going to look at 3 domains. You're looking at their emotional needs, their cognitive, and their behavioral. So what will they recognize what they're feeling, which that was the exercise you did with the cloud, recognize those feelings. What are they thinking, and behavioral, what are they doing? So anytime you're doing your exercises, you want to try to hit all three of those if you can. The objective driven, we talked about that. And then here's what I would suggest that we do in our groups, because we've discussed some really heavy subjects. You want to send them out with something positive about themselves. And so we do relaxation exercises. It might be recapping the lesson and what they need to practice until we come back together again. So give them something to look forward to. And then praising them for their participation and their class engagement. Always want to thank them, reinforce and thank them for the things that you've watched them do that are positive. So here's what I'd like you to do is go ahead and open your book. The issue of listening came up, so I brought that up. You're going to do an exercise. Here we go, page 14. Listening sentence completion. What I'd like you to do is work with your table mates and come up with some answers for that. And it's listening to me means... And so you guys come up with your own answers, and then we'll share as a group. Exercise. Listening means to me. What were some things you guys came up with? What does listening mean to you?
Eye contact, body language.
Okay.
Those
Eye contact, body language. What else?
Attentiveness.
Attentiveness. Okay. How do you know somebody's paying attention?
Maybe nodding once in a while.
Okay.
Saying, oh,
Good. We're going to do an exercise on this in a few minutes. What else does listening mean to you?
Respect.
Respect. Okay. So when someone listens to you, it shows respect.
Being understood.
Being understood. Okay. Any other things?
I'm cared for.
Oh, cared for. Good. It does make you feel important, doesn't it? And valued. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. Let's. How do you? In question number 3, how do you know you're being listened to? What does your partner do that tells you you're being listened to?
Again, eye contact, they look at you.
Okay. So these kind of behaviors is what's telling you. Okay. Anybody have anything specific that their partner does that tells them?
Some have a reaction to what you're
Summarizing. They have a reaction. Okay. Okay. So let's skip down to question 5. When I'm not listened to, I feel. Okay.
Disrespect.
We got angry, rejected, disrespected. Okay. What was that? Distant. Okay. What else? Frustrated.
Not important.
Okay. Not important.
Like giving up.
Like giving up. Oh, good one. Is that when we just go, whatever, I'm out of here? Okay. How else does it make you feel? Lonely. Great. Okay. Any other ones? So one of the things I use this lesson for in working with the clients is, which one of these do you think your partner feels when you don't listen to your partner? You get them thinking about their partner has these same feelings. Do you want your partner to feel unimportant, abandoned, lonely? Or do you want your partner to feel respected and understood, cared for? Because if your partner is over here, how are they going to treat you? If your partner feels unimportant, frustrated, how are they going to treat you? Good or bad? Okay. If they feel important, respected, and understood, how are they going to treat you? Good. So which one do you want? Sometimes you have to break it down that simply for them. Simply get them. But see, do you see where we started? We started with their feelings first. Now we transfer their feelings onto their partner and get them to see that their partner feels the same way. And how are you going to treat people? Good or bad, depending on the way you've been treated. It can be that simple. So let's go down to number 7. Now this particular exercise, we actually, they do this as homework, and we actually do a flip chart exercise around this so that they can come up with different ideas for this. So it gets them engaged, gets them thinking about these behaviors. But the one that they share with their group is, I could be a better listener if I would, what?
Be non-judgmental, watch nonverbals.
Oh, okay. So watch the nonverbals and not be judgmental. Okay.
Talk less.
Talk less. That does help. If the mouth is moving, the ears aren't working as good, huh? Good. Okay. How else could you be a good listener?
Stop making assumptions.
Oh, great. And that does take us into another type of communication, which is we start filling in the blanks before the person's even finished talking.
What about paraphrasing or clarifying what they say to you?
Okay. Do you think that would help you be a better listener?
I think
Sometimes you just
I think
interpret things.
I think it
So
really helps.
What he's saying.
Okay. So that clarification?
Like, what I'm hearing you say,
Mm-hmm.
this, summarize, I guess.
Yes. Verify, summarize. We actually have a lesson later on where we do communication, and we actually go over these very specific types of enhanced communication, like how to ask clarifying questions, how to summarize. And we have a little game that they do. It's a little card game, and they pick a card, and one person is the speaker, and the other ones have to ask questions that are either a clarifying question or they make a summarizing statement or paraphrase. And so I think it's called the ungame. Yeah, and it's just an opportunity for them to practice and learn how to practice these kinds of behaviors. Then they actually have, there's a daily monitor for this one. Okay, go to page 253. Okay, communication barrier. When we're working on this exercise much later in the program, see this listening exercise, this is what, week 7 or something? I mean, it's real early in the program. But later on, we start building on those skills, those things we've been talking about. So in this one, they do some work on communication barriers, such as being a judgmental person or making assumptions. And so they have to identify their barrier, but then they also have to practice these positive communication behaviors. And what we have them do is just circle the ones that they did. So did they ask open-ended questions? So we teach them what an open-ended question is. Did they clarify? Did they summarize? Did they give some encouragement? Nodding is just an encourager that, okay, I'm listening to you. I'm giving you some positive feedback. I'm not saying anything, but I'm giving you some indication I'm paying attention. The eye contact, those little things. So we actually break down some of that behavior, and then we have them practice that for homework. So they begin to practice, what are you doing that's creating barriers to communication at home, and then what are some of the positive things you can do in practice. So back to your listening page. Anything else that you find that you would be a better listener? Was that yours, Juan?
I think you mentioned it, asking questions and be genuinely interested.
Okay. Good.
I think you can be a better listener when you're not preoccupied and trying to give advice.
Good.
And in addition to that, Nada, I'd say too that when you remove that need to be right.
Don't have to be right.
Yeah.
Good.
With technology, we look at our cell phones a lot.
Do you see that? Like people at restaurants and they're like
And when you
sitting there with
look
their
at-
phone?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I catch myself like, it's rude. It is rude.
And it's hard, and because we're in a different, technology society, those are things that we really have to watch for. And it happens in the classes. And this is why it's really important when we're running classes, our cell phones go up. That when we're trying to model for them not to get on their cell phones while we're teaching the class, then we have to do that. You notice like the flip chart exercises and some of the table exercises you've done. I was meandering around. What it does is it gives you as a facilitator an opportunity to hear what they're discussing. You may hear them talk about something that you may hear some errors in thinking, and you may need to bring that up during the group itself to make sure that, you know, if I heard this table express it, it may be going on in somebody else's mind as well. So I need to bring it up in a positive way, but I need to bring it up. It also shows your interest in them. You know, when you're going around and listening and watching what's going on, you're not checking out while they're doing class, because then that creates that distraction as well. It's hard for them to stay focused when the facilitator's left the room. Okay, any other thoughts or questions on this?
Reflect on their responses.
Yes, okay, so that would be a good one here. And we teach them, let's see if I can spell here. We try to teach them how to do reflective listening and reflective responses. And there actually is a lesson in there that teaches them how to do that, empathetic listening. So because we know communication is such a difficult, that was one of the things we talked about earlier, the skill building. That's such a biggie. That's in just about, it's in every phase in one form or another. We're going to talk about communicating as far as talking, communicating as far as listening. And I'm going to have you do an exercise when we get done with our break, when we come back from that you'll actually do some communication work. So we'll work on that.